I still remember the exact moment my boss leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You'll get nothing from this deal." He said it slowly, savoring each word like he was proud of how deeply he could cut me down in front of everyone. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there, nodding politely, because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I already had the entire trap in place, and when it snapped shut, it wouldn't just take my bonus with it, it would take his career. Before I get to that moment, let me explain how we got here. I was the one who built this deal, not in theory, not in some vague, we all contributed way. I physically created the diligence checklist, pulled together the 172 documents into the data room, scrubbed through 11 separate statements of work, coordinated with outside counsel on the RWI insurance policy, and chased down every last missing contractor IP assignment. For 6 months, my fingerprints were on every page, every red line, every late-night version control freeze that kept the buyer's counsel from walking away. But if you'd been in that conference room on day 30, you'd never have known it. My boss strutted around like a Wall Street caricature, bragging to the board about his clean data room, his flawless diligence, his management of the legal teams. And when someone asked if I'd be included in the transaction bonus pool, he laughed. Then came those words. "She'll get nothing, not a cent. It's above her grade." I could feel every eye on me, waiting for me to react. But I didn't, because weeks earlier, I had already realized the truth. If I let him strip me out on paper, I'd never see a dime. The only way to win was to play the rules better than he did. So I turned to the one thing he never respected: process. That's the part most people miss. In corporate deals, it's never about who worked hard or who deserves it. It's about the paperwork, the bylaws, the resolutions, the certifications, and buried in all that dry, boring paperwork was something he couldn't erase: a retention schedule. My retention schedule. 6 months before signing, the board had approved a Schedule A of key employees for retention payments in the event of a change in control. My name was on it. He didn't notice because he never actually read the governance packets. He thought cleaning it up meant sending HR a sloppy memo. But governance minutes, officer certifications, those were mine. And the buyer's counsel had already told us in writing that closing couldn't happen without my signature on the compliance certificate, attaching that very schedule. So when he told me I'd get nothing, I bit my tongue. Let him posture. Let him humiliate me. Because every word he spoke in arrogance only made his fall steeper. I kept my head down. I let him cut me out of meetings. I let him delete me from email chains. I let him believe he had erased me from the deal. Meanwhile, I documented everything. Every time he claimed credit, I marked the version history in the data room. Every time he rewrote a policy, I compared it against the minutes already filed with the board secretary. I didn't need to fight him in that room. The process itself would fight for me. Still, I won't lie. Walking out of that meeting hurt. Hearing someone dismiss months of 14-hour days with nothing burned deeper than I wanted to admit. But I swallowed it because rage doesn't close deals. Paperwork does. And so I went back to my desk, logged into the data room, and stared at the audit trail. Every upload, every signature block, every chain of custody for documents, all tied to me. He thought he was clever, rewriting policies in back channels. But the buyer didn't care about back channels. The buyer cared about certifications. And without my certification, there would be no deal. At that point, all I had to do was stay quiet and let him tighten his own noose. So when he smirked and repeated, "Nothing, you'll get nothing," I smiled back. Because I already knew that by the time the 54 mailbox or wire hit, the only nothing in the room would be the look on his face when he realized how completely he'd lost. If you've ever been told you're getting nothing, stick around and hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens in the boardroom. People always think revenge is loud, explosive, screaming in someone's face or slamming doors. The truth is, real revenge in corporate life is boring. It looks like file versions, email timestamps, and meeting minutes nobody bothers to read. That's how I trapped my boss, months before he even realized there was a war. 6 months before closing day, the deal looked impossible. We were a mid-sized tech company trying to sell ourselves for north of 50 in a market where half the buyers were walking away over missing contractor IP or messy customer contracts. My boss thought data room meant dumping PDFs in random folders. I knew better. I started with a spreadsheet, 14 tabs, 172 line items, color-coded by diligence stream. Vendor SOWs in red, IP assignments in blue, insurance binders in gray. It was mind-numbing work, chasing signatures from freelancers who hadn't thought about our company in years. But without those signatures, the buyer would demand a 20% purchase price haircut, or worse, walk away entirely. While my boss played golf with strategic advisors, I was on Zoom at midnight with a contractor in Warsaw, walking him through an IP assignment clause. I tracked down missing SOC2 evidence, pulled our last 3 penetration test reports, and scrubbed every version of our product's source code archive to remove orphaned licenses. Every single document uploaded went through me, and because I had insisted on using a virtual data room with audit trails, every click had my name stamped on it. Around month 5, HR introduced a change in control policy for the board to approve. Buried in that policy was Schedule A, a retention list of employees critical to the transaction. HR drafted it sloppily, but I reviewed the packet before it went to the board secretary. My boss had assumed only VAPs would be listed. I flagged that omission. The comp committee chair agreed. Without the compliance officer on the list, the buyer's legal team would never trust our reps. And so my name was added. Quietly, formally, legally, he never noticed. That moment changed everything. Because in M&A, once the board minutes include your name, it's real. It doesn't matter if your boss screams otherwise. The paper wins. From then on, I started building my shield. Every time my boss sent me draft-only documents to slip into the data room, I logged version histories. Every time he asked me to just sign something without review, I kicked it back with outside counsel CC'd, not in a hostile way, just with bland professionalism. Please confirm if this aligns with the version board approved on X date. That's the kind of sentence that kills a cover-up. Meanwhile, he was busy taking credit for our May work. In weekly updates, he bragged about the flawless diligence, the organized audit trails, the clean IP chain, never once mentioning I was the one who built it. At first, it stung. Then I realized it was perfect. The more he claimed it, the more he owned the risks. Because once the buyers started asking questions, the trail would point back to me. And the questions did start. The buyer's outside counsel was relentless. Who would sign the compliance certificate? Who would certify IP assignments were complete? Who would confirm Schedule A retention awards had been properly documented? The answer to all 3 was the same: me. Not because I wanted it that way, but because governance had already delegated those authorities to my role. My boss hadn't even read the delegation resolutions. He thought signatures were ceremonial. They weren't. They were binding. The closer we got to signing, the more aggressive he became. Cut her out of the emails. She doesn't need to be in the calls. We'll rewrite the policy later. I let him. Every exclusion only made my trail cleaner. Every deleted invite was another mark in my favor. I wasn't meddling. I was following process. I think the turning point for me personally came one late night in the office. Everyone else had left. My screen glowed with the final retention schedule packet, my name, clean and formal, attached to the officer's certificate template. I sat there staring at it, knowing exactly what it meant. He could erase me from his speeches. He could laugh in my face in meetings. But he couldn't erase this. Not without the buyer noticing. Not without the deal collapsing. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to fight him. I wasn't going to shout or threaten or quit in protest. I was going to let him walk himself straight into a wall he didn't even see coming. Because the cruelest revenge isn't a knife in the back. It's silence. It's letting someone believe they've won, right up until the moment the paperwork proves otherwise. And so I kept quiet. I kept documenting. And I kept preparing for the day when the buyer's lawyers would look across the table and ask one simple question. Where is her signature? The gaslighting started about 2 weeks before signing. It began with little digs, like him forgetting to copy me on buyer correspondence, or asking me to just review something without giving me the version history. Then it escalated. He called me into his office one afternoon, shut the door, and slid a thick binder across his desk. Here, he said, sign this officer certificate. I flipped through the pages. It looked familiar. Compliance certification, clean reps, standard stuff, until I got to the end. Schedule A was missing. The retention list. My retention list. I can't sign this, I said carefully. It's not the board-approved version. His jaw tightened. You don't need to worry about the board. Just sign it. I kept my face neutral, but inside my pulse was hammering. This was it. The first real attempt to erase me from the record. I'll need that in writing, I replied. Can you email me the instruction? He stared at me like I'd just insulted him. Why? Because buyer's counsel will ask. I need to document how the change was authorized. His nostrils flared. For a second I thought he might actually yell. Instead, he leaned back and smirked. Fine, I'll send it. Just don't slow us down. That email never came. The next day, I opened the data room and noticed something off. A new final folder had appeared, with the same compliance certificate, this time uploaded by him. Except the buyer's system tracked version history automatically. You couldn't just overwrite files. You could only add new versions, which meant his final sat right next to mine, with timestamps, upload IDs, and his name stamped across every entry. He thought he was clever. To the buyer, it just looked sloppy. That week, I started CCing outside counsel more often. Not with accusations, not with drama, just innocuous-seeming questions. Can you confirm whether the officer's certificate should attach the retention schedule as approved on date? The kind of email that looks bland until you realize it creates a permanent record. Meanwhile, he doubled down. He told HR to strip my name from internal bonus memos. He deleted me from the invite list for the final diligence call. He even sent the buyer a draft cap table that forgot to list me under key personnel. But here's the thing. Every one of those edits contradicted the board minutes. And the buyer's lawyers, they'd already read the minutes. By the end of that week, they were sending pointed questions. Who will sign the compliance certificate? Who is authorized to confirm IP assignments? Who certified retention schedules in the governance package? Each question had the same answer. Me. That's when the panic set in. He started stopping by my desk unannounced, trying to corner me with charm one moment and intimidation the next. We just need to move fast. Don't make this complicated. Nobody cares about the attachments. Then 10 minutes later, if you don't cooperate, this whole deal falls apart. You want to be the reason $54 million disappears? I said the same thing every time. Happy to proceed once we align with the board-approved version. Neutral, calm, professional. It drove him insane. One night, I caught him in the office after hours, hunched over the printer, red pen scratching across a retention schedule. He didn't even notice I'd walked in until I was at the door. He froze, then without a word shoved the papers into a folder and left. By then I wasn't even angry. I almost pitied him. He was playing checkers. I was playing chess with the buyer's counsel, the board secretary, and the audit trail as my allies. I didn't need to fight him. I just needed to hold the line. And I did. Every time he pushed, I stayed silent, stayed professional, stayed procedural. Every attempt to cut me out only tightened the noose around his neck. Because eventually the buyer was going to sit across the table, open the file, and ask one simple question. Why is this missing? And when they did, the entire facade would collapse. If you've ever been told to just sign it when you knew something was wrong, hit like. Because the moment of reckoning was only days away. The week of signing felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Every morning started with a closing checklist call that ran for hours, a spreadsheet with over 200 line items being ticked down one by one, escrow wiring instructions, bring down reps, tax certificates, IP schedules. By day 3, we were almost there. Almost. But one item sat glaringly red: compliance officer certificate with retention schedule. A attached. I knew it. The buyer knew it. What my boss didn't realize was how central that one piece of paper had become. We sat in the main conference room, a U-shaped table covered in thick binders and laptops glowing with too many open documents. On one side, our company's leadership, my boss at the center, posturing like he was running the show. On the other, the buyer's deal team, their lead counsel flipping calmly through a printed checklist, pen tapping each item. "Okay," she said, looking up. "We're ready to finalize the officer certificates. Can we get the version with Schedule A attached?" My boss didn't flinch. "We'll deliver the officer certificate today. Schedule A isn't necessary." The room went still. "It is necessary," buyer's counsel replied flatly. "It's referenced in the board minutes, and our RWI underwriter won't issue coverage without it. No schedule, no policy. No policy, no close." A bead of sweat slid down his temple. "It's just an internal bonus thing," he insisted, "not material." That was the wrong thing to say. The buyer's tax lawyer leaned forward. "Anything tied to retention is material. If we close without it, we're inheriting undisclosed liabilities. That's not happening." All eyes shifted, first to him, then slowly to me. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I could feel my pulse pounding. This was it, the moment the paperwork trap snapped shut. I reached into my binder and pulled out the version I had pre-tabbed days earlier. Yellow sticky flags marked the board resolution date, the delegation of authority, the officer's certificate, and finally, Schedule A with my name cleanly listed. I slid it across the table. "This," I said, my voice calm, "is the board-approved version." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the buyer's counsel smiled slightly and tapped her pen against the page. "Perfect. We'll need this executed." My boss's face turned a shade I'd never seen before, pale but mottled with red around the edges, like all the blood in his body couldn't decide where to go. He snatched the paper, flipping through it too quickly, as if he could somehow wish my name away. But the signature blocks, the minutes, the secretary's attestations, they were all there, immutable. "Detach that schedule," he hissed under his breath. Buyer's counsel leaned forward. "If you detach the schedule, we walk. Simple as that." Silence. The kind of silence that makes you hear every click of a pen, every shuffle of paper, every shallow breath in the room. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The audit trail, the minutes, the governance structure, they were speaking for me. And then came the coup de grace. The buyer's outside counsel opened her laptop and pulled up the data room on the projector. With 2 clicks, she showed the full version history of the certificate. My upload, time-stamped weeks ago. His upload later, missing the schedule. Her voice was ice. "Why is there a discrepancy in your final folder?" He froze. The entire room watched as his face drained even further. His mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. That's when I knew. The deal was no longer his to control. All I had to do now was wait for the board to act. 2 hours before the wire was scheduled to hit, the boardroom was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Directors dialed in from 3 time zones. Buyer's counsel sat poised with red-lined binders, and the underwriters were waiting on a single answer. Was the compliance certificate valid, or wasn't it? I sat at the far end of the table, my binder perfectly aligned, tabs glowing like colored battle flags. My boss sat in the center, collar damp, fingers drumming the table just a little too fast. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The buyer's lead counsel opened calmly. "We're prepared to close today, but before we proceed, there's a discrepancy. The officer's certificate in your final folder omits Schedule A. The board minutes reference it explicitly. Which version is correct?" Silence. All eyes shifted to my boss. He cleared his throat. The omission was intentional. Schedule A isn't material to the transaction. It's an internal HR matter. The chairman of our board leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. That is not accurate. Schedule A was reviewed and approved by the Compensation Committee and ratified in the board packet, dated month, day. Another director cut in. Are you suggesting you unilaterally altered a board-approved document? The air thickened. My boss's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked cornered, desperate, like a trapped animal scanning for an escape. Buyer's counsel slid a packet across the table, my version complete with signatures, timestamps, and audit trail printouts. This is the only version we will accept. Without it, our RWI underwriter will not bind coverage. Without coverage, we cannot close. The clock is ticking. Everyone looked at me. I flipped the binder open, page to page. The resolution, the delegation, the officer certificate, and finally, Schedule A. My name, plain as day. I turned the page and slid it back. This, I said evenly, is the board-approved version. I am ready to sign. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then the chairman spoke. Effective immediately, you are removed from this signing session, he said, pointing at my boss. We'll address your conduct separately. I had never seen a face turn that pale. He slumped back, lips thin, eyes glassy, as security quietly approached to escort him out. When the door clicked shut behind him, the entire energy shifted. The buyer's counsel exhaled, underwriters nodded, and the chairman gestured toward me. Please execute. My pen didn't shake. I signed the officer certificate, attached Schedule A, and passed it across. The buyer's counsel countersigned, slid it to the underwriter, and within minutes, the RWI binder was confirmed. The wire instructions were triggered. $54,000 in cash consideration queued for transfer. But here's the twist he never saw coming. Because he tried to cut me out, the buyer added a make-good payment directly to me over and above my retention. They told me plainly, we don't tolerate people being erased. You did the work. You get the credit. As the documents zipped across DocuSign and the wire confirmation hit inboxes, I watched the relief ripple around the table. Hands shook, champagne bottles cracked somewhere down the hall. But I just sat there, calm, collected, almost serene. Because in that moment, I knew the revenge was complete. He thought I'd get nothing. Instead, he got nothing. His career, his reputation, his authority, gone in an instant. And all I had to do was follow the process. The morning after closing, the office felt like a different planet. The deal had gone through, the 54-mile wire had hit, and half the company was running around with champagne flutes like they'd just survived the apocalypse. But the one person you didn't see anywhere? My boss? Officially, they said he was on leave. Unofficially, everyone knew what that meant. The board had already opened an internal investigation into his misrepresentation of board-approved documents. That's corporate speak for we caught you lying, and now we're just lining up the paperwork to bury you. Within a week, the announcement went out. Terminated for cause. No severance. No bonus. No retention. His LinkedIn went dark. His email account deactivated overnight. He vanished from the building like he'd never been there. Meanwhile, my inbox lit up. A thank you from the chairman. We couldn't have done this without you from buyer's counsel. Even the underwriter sent a note complimenting how meticulously I had prepared the file trails. And then came the kicker, the wire transfer to my account. Retention bonus paid in full, plus the buyer's make-good payment, 6 figures, wired directly, no middleman. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. I'll never forget sitting at my kitchen table that night, staring at my bank app, the extra zeros, almost unreal. I poured myself a cheap glass of wine, heated up leftovers, and just let it sink in. After months of gaslighting, erasure, and humiliation, the trap had sprung exactly the way I knew it would. But the best part wasn't the money. It was the small, quiet moments afterward. 3 weeks later, I got a message from a junior analyst on our team. Thank you. You gave me courage. I watched you hold the line, and I realized I don't have to just roll over either. That hit harder than any wire transfer. Then came the buyer's offer. They wanted me on their side of the table. A higher title, better pay, full benefits. They'd seen firsthand what I could do under pressure, and they weren't going to let me walk. My old boss. Last I heard, he was still trying to peddle himself as a strategic advisor to startups. But in a world where governance records are public, his reputation was finished. Nobody wanted the guy who got tossed out of a 54-month deal for tampering with board documents. As for me, I moved on. New role, new city, new team. But sometimes I still think back to that moment in the boardroom. The silence, the pale face, the pen in my hand. He thought he had erased me. He thought he had all the power. In the end, he got exactly what he promised me. Nothing. And me? I got everything he tried to take away. So here's the moral. In corporate life, rage won't save you. Tears won't save you. But the paperwork always tells the truth.